Okay, okay, fantastic. All righty. Just going to screenshot that. We're good. Okay, awesome. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining us for our monthly Global Chamber Export Import Forum. I'm the moderator, Anita Rodal, president of SBPI Services Incorporated. SBPI Services represents several currency exchange companies and helps global businesses lower their rates and fluctuation risks on their cross-border payments. For US-based businesses, we also broker inventory, working capital, and equipment loans. Our forum today is 55 minutes, and the last 5 to 10 minutes, I'll open it up for Q&A and conversation. But until then, everybody who's not named Caitlin Valderrama, please put yourselves on mute. Okay. I do have a couple of networking tips for you. It's a very good idea to use your first and last name on Zoom. That might already have been changed for you, but please do put your first and your last name. It makes it easier for people to find you afterward. And secondly, put all your contact information in the chat, like your email, your phone number, your LinkedIn link, and then remember to save the chat afterwards because that way you can find other people as well. So today we are very, very lucky to have Caitlin Valderrama with us, and I'm going to tell you just a little bit about Caitlin. It's a lot to tell, so I'm giving you the very abbreviated version. Caitlin Valderrama is a licensed customs broker and certified logistics, transportation, and distribution professional. She is the Air and Ocean Branch Manager at Main Freight Americas in Phoenix, Arizona. Caitlin's broad knowledge base in supply chain management ranges from forecasting to inventory management to freight forwarding on both domestic and international levels. She has worked and lived in Russia, Ireland, Argentina, Peru, and Belgium for a total of 8 years, and she speaks 4 languages, so she's got me beat by 2. Caitlin is also a certified TSA coordinator and an International Air Transport Association certified hazmat cargo handler with expertise in air and ocean operations. Working in partnership with her customers, Caitlin supports their import and export supply chains, strategically setting them up for growth, efficiency, and cost effectiveness. So welcome, Caitlin.
Thank you.
So today's topic is reducing risk and preempting problems in your supply chain. And you're going to get tips for importers and exporters of all sizes. But first, I like to start off my interviews with 3 very quick icebreaker questions. This is like speed dating. So in 60 seconds or less for each of these, first of all, tell us how you got into this business, Caitlin.
I was working in Cusco, Peru, and basically I was the Machu Picchu regional manager, and I was taking care of tourism. So I was getting everybody their flights, their hotels, their private train rides up to see Machu Picchu, and I wanted more growth, and I realized that supply chain was a way to do it. It was a little bit more steady going into the supply chain logistics, a lot more business opportunity than tourism alone. And so when I came back from Peru to the United States, I made that my career focus to get into it.
Oh my God, that's great. It's like I love that you were inspired in Peru and Machu Picchu. It's like that's one of the best. It's one of the best responses to this question I've gotten. Okay, so what do you like the best about what you do?
I like how every day you're learning something new. So you have a customer calling into you, they have a question, they have a problem, then you can really have in-depth conversations with your customers, learning more not only about their business, but just about their general commodity or the industry that's important. That's their focus. So you understand a lot more about where they are coming from in business wise. And then you have to do your research and you have to get back to them so that you're able to contribute to the growth and the stability of their company. And so every day I'm researching something new that I didn't know before.
It's like fun. And you're getting paid to do it. I love that. Okay, the flip side of that coin is what do you like the least about what you do?
Yeah, I like that question that you asked that. It's definitely the unpredictability. It's fun, right? You're always learning. There's always something new. There's always oh, that's a question no one's ever asked before. But on the reverse flip side, it's the unpredictability. So you don't know coming into work each day what that email might contain when you open it up. Like, what's the question? What's the problem? Where do we go from here? And how serious is it a problem for for putting out a fire? A lot of people come to their freight forwarder to fix their problems, and it's hard to know what's coming down the line to you.
Okay, that makes sense. So I totally get that. Okay, so there are a lot of moving pieces. Just so everybody knows, we're going to talk about a lot of different subjects within the overall umbrella of supply chain management. So just know that this is just the tip of the iceberg. And if you have more questions or need help with anything or know anybody that needs help with anything, you'll be able to reach out to Caitlin. She'll put her contact information in the chat sometime during the next hour. So I was curious. I went to Google and I put in what is the definition of supply chain? And it said a supply chain is defined as the interconnected network of individuals, organizations, activities, information, and resources involved in creating and delivering a product or service. Well, that's very sterile and non-kinetic. So, Caitlin, what is your definition of a supply chain?
Well, the logistics front of the supply chain, I'll answer that first, right? It's getting cargo from point A to point B, but it could be involved with cross-country border trade. It could be involved with various modes. But I think supply chain, it really goes into the raw material down to the end consumer. And that is starting with the pulling the product out of the ground or manufacturing it. So it really is a trade between the manufacturer downstream completely to the consumption of a product. And all of those processing stages, warehousing stages, customs clearance, freight stages, manufacturing at the final end that go into that product actually being used what it's been created for.
Kind of like conductors of an orchestra.
Yeah.
Like there's so many moving pieces that you're kind of helping oversee, right?
Yeah, I think you're like in supply chain, like true end-to-end supply chain. Not only are you the conductor, but you're also the instrument manufacturer, right?
Yeah.
Like you're sourcing the strings for the instrument too. But at least on the freight side, it's not that entire end-to-end point. It's the
Okay.
really the movement and facilitating the trade between countries and between different users of a particular product. This is my
Okay,
vision of it.
great. Perfect. So, how does supply chain management differ from an importing versus an exporting perspective?
So, from an importing and exporting, I would say it's that push and pull perspective. So, when you are importing, you are generally trying to work with the directing overseas, right? So, if you're in the US and you're directing from a manufacturer over in Malaysia, then there's a lot of due diligence that you need to do of your manufacturer just to make sure that the quality control is there on somebody else's business, that they're creating the product that meets your standards. And you don't have that control, right? You're buying from an outside company or even a sister branch. On the export side, you are the one manufacturing, so you're controlling the quality, the sale, the price of the product, the price of the inputs, and then you're directing it outward and trying to find those buyers overseas. So both of them have different risks. They both develop on strong relationships. I think an importer, at least from my perspective, and freight, an importer is a bit more vulnerable because they also have to source with a good supplier at origin and conduct all that traceability of their product that they're buying from origin. Whereas the exporter, if you're manufacturing, you know your product, you know the quality, you know the sources, you know how to control the manage the deviations of that product. So you have a bit more control in the entire process in the supply chain if you're the one exporting out.
Okay. Oh, that's interesting. Okay. So, one of the many areas where people can run into problems is not properly vetting import procedures and permit requirements at a destination. So, how would you verify, if you're a company, how would you verify import requirements into the U.S. and what types of topics should they verify, and what are the consequences of not verifying import requirements?
Okay, so it depends on what your product is, but I saw, for example, somebody popped up about wine and spirits. And so, for example, there's a lot of alcohol rules that come through. There's requirements regarding the alcohol content and different permits that are required for bringing in the wine. And so, what you want to make sure you're doing is before anything departs the origin country, if you do have anything that is, for example, FDA related, that's the biggest. We bring in so much like food products and drinks, for example, and even plates and cups. A lot of people don't realize that a plate and a cup also needs FDA customs clearance because it's a food contact surface.
Wow.
And yeah, so it doesn't require a permit or a license, but at least it's something to be aware of that you need to know the food, the manufacturer's details overseas to make sure that you're bringing in something that doesn't contain lead on the plate. And then all of a sudden you're bringing in lead plates and selling them in the US. So I would say do your due diligence before anything departs the origin country and really during your purchase process. You would want to find out for food, for example, if your supplier has a food facility manufacturer's registration number, for example. Are they registered with the US with their, I think it's 11-digit number? So then you don't have that question that comes from your broker when the cargo is arriving, and all of a sudden you find out that you purchased from a non-registered food facility manufacturer overseas. The other ones would be for the agriculture, for example. You would want to make sure that you have any of your phytosanitary certificates. So if you're bringing in, seeds, sometimes it's anything for the growing product, plants as well. You're going to need the phytosanitary, and that is something that you receive. Basically, the product is inspected at origin before it departs. Then you have a certain amount of time that the phyto is available or that the phyto is valid until you bring it into the US. So once again, you need to make the product available to inspection at the origin country before you can bring it in. If it arrives, there's no phytosanitary, then you could have problems again at destination. Fish and wildlife as well is another one. Customers who bring in products such as, I don't know, like feathers or abalone shell or anything that is a questionable type of, animal product. Fish and wildlife wants to make sure that it's not coming from an endangered animal or something that is not supposed to be exported out of the country, elephant tusks, furniture, whatnot. And so you will need to register and get a fish and wildlife certificate, which is on the Fish and Wildlife website. And it's an import permit that's valid a year at a time and can be renewed. So there's so many different kinds of permits that come into play that everything, though, you have to make sure you verify before it departs origin.
Do things get sent back or destroyed? Like on the first one, if they don't have like a certificate of manufacturing, if their source doesn't have that, does it just get rejected? It gets sent back? And who pays for things like that?
Yeah. So ultimately, it would be going down to the Incoterms who paid for it, right? Because if your seller said, I'm paying for everything delivered to your door, including customs clearance, and the seller of the overseas country didn't do the due diligence on customs, then they would be paying for it. And I know there's a question later on about Incoterms, but if you said to your seller, I will do FOB, I will pay and cover all risk from the origin port at the origin country through to customs, through to receipt at my door, then you're the one paying for it. So it goes a lot back to contracts and, properly vetting your suppliers who you're buying from, but also the contracts in terms of who carries the risk. The consequence of not having done the due diligence and not having the right paperwork in place is usually financial consequences, or it can be put onto a flag list basically for customs. So after a cargo arrives, it has 15 days to clear. If you don't clear it because you're missing paperwork, it goes into something called general order. General order is, depending on how big the city is, it's either a specific customs warehouse that's general order, or it's a specific area of like a known, like a standard warehouse company, right? Customs might lease space from them. And so general order is very expensive then because storage accrues daily. And depending on the size of your product that is sitting in general order, you'll have storage accruing daily, which can get quite dangerous and quite expensive because it's almost like it's just compounding and it can get very expensive. We've seen products that are food products like tofu I've seen before where it just got rejected. Customs said, you know what, we don't think this was made by a valid, safe manufacturer for overseas. And so the entire container, after sitting for like 2 months, had to get shipped back overseas because it was too much to simply destroy. If after general order you can't clear the goods, you can't bring them in, you can send them over to be destroyed. And usually customs has either an assigned destruction company or you can choose the destruction company, but you need a certificate to prove to customs from like a third party that it was properly, incinerated. So
Wow. What happens if someone doesn't have the money to pay for that? Like, if you can't get water from a rock, do they like file for bankruptcy and dissolve their company? Like how? It sounds like it can get into a lot of money.
it can, which is why you want to, write the right contracts in the first place when you buy the product.
Yeah.
Um, but yes, it can become a lot of money. Then it can be, Customs and Border Patrol is just like the IRS. They get paid first. So, there's actually some FAQs right now where people are expecting IEPA refunds, but that's checked as well, right? So if you're expecting an IEPA refund, but you owe the government for something else, the government's going to take that money out for the CBP specifically, not like taxes, but if you owe duties for something that went into default, then the government's going to take that out and give you the remaining portion if there is any. So, bankruptcy is so serious. Maybe there's a business loan that can be secured, something like that.
Okay, that's interesting. Now, what about if they're shipping overseas as an exporter as opposed to an importer? Like, how does all this work for them in terms of like what requirements should be verified?
If you're shipping overseas, the sales contract, the Incoterms are really serious. If you want zero risk as an exporter, then you should sell Ex Works. EXW for shorthand. So selling Ex Works basically means that the buyer overseas is responsible for hiring the freight forwarder, who hires the trucking company, who arranges the export, customs process, the ocean or air freight, and then the importing customs to you as the buyer in your own country. So that is the least amount of risk, right? You just say, here's my product, come and get it. You pay me for the product. We'll pack it up, we'll palletize it for you. That's always helpful as a supplier to, crate it properly so it doesn't get damaged. But we've even seen cases where people are just like, no, you have to bring in a packer. You have to
And
get
I
your
know that,
recruiter to come by.
yeah, and I don't know what it's like in other places, but I know that there's companies here that if things don't arrive palletized a specific way on a specific pallet, they get rejected. They have to be repacked before they'll be accepted. So I'm guessing that could also happen, even if you're the exporter and you're doing that, but your X works, but you're packaging it up. If you don't package it up the way they need, then you still have some liability. Yeah.
Yeah, there's fumigated pallets. So it's the ISPM is what we call it for short, but basically there's maybe half the countries in the world. They require fumigated wood pallets, and that's a way to control pests. So you can either ship product on a fumigated pallet that is stamped, plywood crates work as well because those are fumigated. They're just, wood mashed together that's been severely processed. But you can't simply build a crate or build a pallet from wood that you bought at Home Depot yourself and then ship it out. And we have seen instances of that as well, where people are selling one off something they sold on eBay, a motorcycle to a foreign country, and they build the crate themselves using wood, but it's not properly stamped. And so then it arrives at the destination country, and then the buyer has a headache on their hands. I once had a shipment in Oregon where I had to personally go and what happened is the pallet arrived from Brazil, but it wasn't a wood stamped. It wasn't a fumigated wood pallet. And so I had to watch customs cut the banding. They removed the machine that was on the pallet, put it over here, and then we had to pay like $400 just to ship this wood pallet back to Brazil because customs didn't want it. And they, rather than incinerating it and having whatever pest fears might have, have any bugs come into our own environment, they wanted it just shipped out of the country that same day. And
Oh.
so
And how did they palletize it to make sure that nothing escaped? Like, did they use plastic?
no, no. It was just throw a label onto that wood pallet. It's going back to GRU, and
Oh my
it
goodness.
had to sit
Okay,
in a
that's
warehouse, right? It never got delivered. So once it came into the US airport
mhm.
warehouse facility, somebody caught it, whether it was customs or somebody working for the airline. They're like, hey, this isn't fumigated. So customs never let the product deliver until it was, supervised that the machine was removed from the pallet and the pallet sent back. So we do see that. It's mostly just people who sell something maybe on eBay that don't know about fumigated wood pallets. And they're selling internationally, but then, now all of a sudden it could be stuck in storage at destination country, and it could be, thousands X amount of dollars that somebody has to pay. And now you're in dispute with your buyer overseas over who pays for this because maybe you didn't know that you had to fumigate the wood.
wow. Okay. Alrighty. So what resources are available for people for verifying the permit requirements in all these different countries?
Um, from an exporter's perspective, if you want to control the export to a buyer overseas, you
Mhm.
have to partner with your buyer. You have to have a good relationship with the buyer. For example, I would recommend that even if your contract is CFR, where basically an exporter is paying to ship the cargo to the destination port, but not taking on the fee for customs clearances and delivery, it still is good to have bilateral communication with that buyer so that if they do have specific requirements, you can help them with having that sale, right? So like you can help them um, by asking them what paperwork they require, what documents do they require. The other resource besides just talking to your buyer, right? Because we're assuming people are exporting and they want repeat business. So to have repeat business, you gotta, develop an SOP, you gotta have a conversation, ask them what they need. If it's a one-off, you do what you want. But no, the risks. But I think that when it comes down to there's also freight forwarders, and that's where we come in, which comes back to that learning point where if a customer is asking us to ship something to, I don't know, to India or ship something over to Ireland, for example, you're going to be wanting to check with that destination team. So your freight forwarder, whoever you hire, should have a network. They should have a trusted agent overseas, and they should also correspond and give that freight forwarder time. So maybe you were working on a sale for 3 months, but you told the forwarder, hey, it needs to be picked up tomorrow and shipped out. That way, when we have so little time, we can't correspond with the destination country to verify what are the rules. Is this documentation approved? Does a valid phone number for the consignee? Do they have a broker already? If you're in a hurry and you want it to move quickly because you finally closed the sale and got paid, it also is helpful for you to partner with whoever you're using for freight, hopefully to let them do their research as well.
So they could be doing it simultaneously.
Yep. Sometimes we have customers who say, hey, I have a new customer, but we're going to start shipping in 3 months. Can you find out from the destination team and destination country what it is that is required to import my product? And that way they can do their research. They can talk to the consignee, verify all their details, their chosen broker, delivery addresses. Does the delivery address need a flatbed or a full container delivery, for example? You want to make sure there's enough time so that, yes, you close your sale, that's fantastic, but you need to also make sure that there's at least, a couple days of luxury for people to figure out. Otherwise, you just tell them to send it, they air freight it over to Brazil, and it just sits there because nobody's ready at destination for it.
And then you're
And
paying storage fees.
that's the worst case scenario. I would always recommend like let your forwarder at least give them a little bit of time so that you can not be in a hurry to send cargo immediately.
Yeah, that makes sense. What does CFR stand for, by the way?
It's cost and freight.
Oh,
So cost and freight basically is you as an exporter from the US would pay for, the pickup, the air or ocean freight to the destination port of choice. And that's what I see is really common for US exports to overseas, because that way you're not taking on the risk of the duties, you're not taking on the risk of the customs clearance, paperwork if there's complications, and you don't need to handle the door delivery. So cost and freight's a great one. CIF, which is cost and freight and insurance. if you want to cover insurance during the ocean freight or air freight portion. That's another opportunity. The biggest risk for an exporter from the US would be deliver duty paid, which is DDP. And that's because you're telling your buyer that you will cover everything from your door to their door. And so that means you're paying for the customs clearance, which can sometimes be an unknown, because customs import countries always have the ability to, change or reclassify if they want. And then let's say you wanted to deliver it in an ocean container, but then all of a sudden you find out that they prefer flatbed delivery. Now you are stuck with the cost to transload the cargo, put it onto a flatbed truck, and then still deliver to your customer's door because you told them it would be DDP.
Nice. Okay. That's good stuff to keep in mind. Okay, so let's pivot to documentation and talk about how people can use documentation to their advantage. So, what is an original house bill of lading and how does it support international shipments?
Yeah, I mean, right now we're talking about areas to mitigate risk. I think that OBLs are a way to mitigate risk if you don't know your buyer very well. So I'm doing this again from the exporter perspective, but it works in the reverse for imports. But there's an original house bill, and then there's a side point, which would be the site inspections and letter of credit. So an original house bill, let's say you don't know your buyer very well, you agreed to 30% payment terms up front, but then 70% once the cargo departs on the water. How do you make sure you actually get that 70% once the cargo departs? Because it's on a boat, it's out of your hands. You have no control. Once it arrives to the destination country, which might be a country you've never personally even been to, how do you really guarantee then that you actually get paid that remaining funds? So the original house bill is a great way to do that. It's working with your freight forwarder to have it done. But what it is basically is a hold on the cargo so that nothing gets provided. The cargo does not get provided to the consignee without you signing off on a receipt. So we can do OBLs at origin or original house bills at destination. So an original house bill at origin would be the forwarder actually prints it out and gives you a document marked original, and then you keep it on your desk at in the US. Once you receive full payment of that 70% remaining because the cargo's departed, then you would stamp it, you would sign it and give it back to the forwarder, who then can release the cargo, which means once it arrives at a destination country, there's no holds on the product. It can fully deliver and be made available to the consignee. The reverse or another option would be original house bill at destination. So you get the house bill original here in the US, you sign it, you stamp it, and then you FedEx it yourself over to I see that question there, over to the consignee. And so then when the cargo arrives at destination, the consignee's job is to get that FedEx, get that original house bill, and then provide it to the destination agent and say, look, XYZ person in the US signed off on it. Here's their stamp, here's their signature. It says original, only one was ever provided. This proves that I paid my remaining amount due. And so it is a way to secure if you're not very familiar with who your buyer is, maybe there just isn't that much trust in the relationship yet. Maybe it starts out with OBLs, maybe later on you do express bills of lading, for example. But I see them a lot in agricultural shipments with original house bills. But it's a way to ensure that you have at least one final step, that the cargo just simply won't arrive at the destination country and then be released without your hold on it. And we always take them very seriously, because if there is a hold at destination and the customer is still owed money and you release it, then who's at fault, right? Is it the forwarder who released 250 grand of product that wasn't even paid for yet? So that's our worst fear.
Okay. Oh my goodness. Okay.
Yeah.
So you covered a lot there and you actually touched on different types of bill of lading. So let's switch to, um, you kind of alluded to the Incoterms, which is international commercial terms. And those are, for people that don't know, the three-letter codes that represent the International Chamber of Commerce's universally recognized trade rules. So they mean the same thing for everybody everywhere, which is lovely. So what do CFR, EXW, which you sort of talked about a little bit, DDP, and FOB stand for? Because those seem to be ones that would show up a
Mhm.
lot.
So CFR is cost and freight, so you're paying to cover it to the destination port. CIF would be the same thing, but with insurance that this
Mhm.
shipper is paying for. FOB is very common as well. So it's a bit of a shared liability. So basically, it's freight on board. So as an exporter, you might cover from your door to the CFS station or LAX airport, for example. And then once it delivers at LAX airport, then it's going to be the buyer's insurance claim and ownership of the goods there. So the buyer, if the plane crashes, it's going to be the buyer who's responsible for the insurance claim versus you, your liability ends once it makes it onto the plane or onto the ocean vessel. And then delivered duty paid is another one where you're paying all of the essentially end to end. So with the IEEPA tariffs being so strong, a lot of people switched where before they would do FOB from China, and then all of a sudden they started doing DDP from China. And so it was the Chinese manufacturer sharing the weight and the liability of the higher Trump tariffs with their customer in the US. And GDP could also mean questionable valuation that Customs is now doing a lot of investigations on, just as a heads up.
Oh, wow.
So let's
Okay.
say a product used to cost $10,000 a widget coming from China when it was FOB, but then all of a sudden, now that it was DDP and the foreign shipper is paying for the freight and the customs clearance, maybe the value on that commercial invoice went down from 10K to 7.5K. Customs is looking at those kind of algorithms to try to understand it's the same product. Now all of a sudden it's cheaper. So then the tariff liability is cheaper. And that sounds like tariff fraud. So that's a big risk that a lot of people are need to be aware of with GDP. You can't properly vet the way your cargo is customs cleared into the US.
Okay. That's interesting.
Um,
Okay,
Along
so
those
let's see.
lines, there's
Yeah.
DAP, which is maybe
Okay.
for some people ideal, but it's basically the freight's paid door to door, right? Like you get the FedEx invoice, freight's paid door to door, but you hire and arrange the customs clearance yourself as an importer into the US.
And what does the actual acronym stand for?
Delivered at place.
Okay.
So DAP is a good one where you're taking on the customs duties, hiring your broker, making sure they have proper value on the commercial invoice, the steel, the section 232 copper amount, steel amount is accurate. But I'm sorry, my daughter just
That's okay. No
she's
worries.
sick today. I had two kids home, one kid's upstairs, one kid's downstairs. But she seems okay. Um DAP, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
delivered
that's
at
totally fine.
place.
Okay. Okay, perfect. Okay. So why is it so important to focus on export requirements when selling overseas? And how can exporters mitigate the risk on their export compliance programs and, things like EAR 99, which what US Export Administration Regulation. Hi, sweetie. I hope you feel better. I'm sorry you don't feel good.
Maybe, do you want to go over there? Okay, she might sit with me.
That's totally
Um,
fine. That's totally
yeah.
fine. She may know things.
So
So,
for
yeah.
export regulation, I will say that there has been almost an explosion. I don't know if that's the right word, but the idea is that people are starting to look at their export compliance that maybe they didn't before, and that's happening also in trade with import compliance because of the Trump tariffs.
Mhm.
So export compliance, I would recommend that you're dealing more with the US government, being you don't want to get on their blacklist. So you want to
Right.
take care of properly doing your export customs so that the US government doesn't find out later that you exported microchips, right? There was just a recent case where somebody exported microchips to China that wasn't actually allowed to export. And that
Right.
caused a lot of, sorry, baby, one second. And that caused a lot of problems where they had, millions of dollars in penalties. And that's where, NVIDIA was just given permission by Trump when Trump went over to Beijing, and they were given
Uh-huh.
permission to sell their microchips overseas to China that they didn't have before. So when it comes to EAR 99, that is basically no license required. There's two different instances. One is EAR 99 where you don't need a license, but sometimes like sending a laptop overseas that has a Word program on it, right? Just general commercial Word, that even needs a license to export out. It's a public
Oh,
license. You don't have to apply for it, but it still does have a license number that you have to register. So then the government knows that some kind of US intellectual property is exporting overseas as a part of this laptop. And we've had that a few times where we're Googling the, Microsoft Word and Microsoft Excel license, and it's available online, but we still have to tell the government. So when it comes to export licenses, it really is more that you don't want to make an enemy of the US government. So you want to be properly vetting. So there's something called BIS, the Bureau of Industrial, I want to say studies, but I just flipped on that. So BIS, it actually is where you can see if your product is part of a controlled export. So people who ship out drones that maybe could have a military application, you might want to be checking for that. If you have any particular, like even GIS or like a GPS imaging software that's used for computers, but it could be used for a military application as well, you want to be aware of checking the BIS. And make sure that you're not exporting anything in the nuclear realm as well. So for export customs, there's just so many different areas. There's 7 different categories of what could be, anti-terrorism is another category as well. And I would just say for exporters, you want to create some kind of compliance manual, even if it's like a 10-page manual or a 5-page manual in Word. We always recommend so that if the US government ever comes knocking and they're like, did you properly vet and do a red flag list of your buyers overseas because you have a product that might have military applications? Did you actually follow your own process? And it's very helpful for people to mitigate their risk by actually providing the US a Word document that says, yes, this is how we made sure that we weren't selling to anybody questionable overseas, that our product was going to the end user who bought it, and there were no red flags.
okay.
The same
Interesting.
goes on the import compliance side. The
Sure.
US also has you can literally Google it, but it's about 20 questions where if you ever are concerned about getting a customs audit, download those questions, go through it. You can take 6 months to complete it, but having a Word document where you have a process of doing import compliance properly is really helpful to just to be prepared. And the government provides those questions. They provide you what they're looking for. So it will be very helpful for you as an importer to go through those questions slowly and get
Oh,
that's
that's great. You're not reinventing the wheel then.
Hey baby, can you look at
So let's see. Freight forwarders, lots
Yes.
of choices. What do you suggest people keep in mind when they're reviewing freight forwarders that they might want to work with?
Yeah, I think that when it comes to selecting a freight forwarder, you want to make sure that you're talking to somebody. I'm sorry, baby. I'm just gonna fall again. Oh, you want to make
I
sure
was
that
feeling
you are
pretty
talking.
good right about now.
I know. I'm almost like want to like turn on the TV again. She's very excited by videos. When you're meeting with a freight forwarder, let's say you focus regionally on a certain area of the world, right? Like shipping to Africa or shipping to Asia, you want to make sure that you're working with a forwarder who either has their own offices in that country or who has like a long-term network. So if you have a forwarder who doesn't have a relationship in New Zealand, for example, and they're like, yeah, we're just expanding to that area, and your business, the majority of your business is going to be to New Zealand, that forwarder might not be the right fit for you. So I think
No,
that's
yeah.
really important, is making sure, because if you do have questions like what we talked about, if you do have questions like what we talked about before, like you're shipping overseas to a foreign country and that forwarder doesn't have a network there, it's going to be really
Yeah.
difficult for you to get the answers you need and then get the buy-in and the help. Another one is the visibility of your cargo. So when your cargo is moving overseas, does that forwarder just give you an Excel every day? Do they provide any kind of online portal? Do they have expectations for, GPS tracking of the cargo, whether it's on landside in the US? Do they do GPS tracking on the ocean container as well? That way, if your company ever comes to you and they're like, hey, where's that shipment to deliver yet? Having that portal can be really helpful versus doing it a bit more old school, which would be Excel and emails. Nobody has time anymore to look at just an Excel every day. And then you question, is this the latest Excel? When was it updated? Was it updated, 6 a.m. or 3 p.m.? What's the latest information? And so I think those are two really important parts when running a freight forwarder.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Um, so if you're changing freight forwarders on shipments, um, things could happen where you think they're going to be doing something and they're in fact not, or whatever, right? So what are some of those risks if you're working with a new forwarder each shipment?
Yeah, I think no, sweetie. Please, please, please. Baby, in 20 minutes. No. Okay, sorry. She was sick today and has a fever and a cough, so I apologize on this. But
No worries.
there's just people need to be aware of. It's fine if you want to switch forwarders on every single shipment. Let's say that you buy your product CFR and you're the US importer. 1 month it could be coming in with importer, with a freight forwarder A that your Chinese manufacturer chose. 2 weeks later, it comes in with another company. 3 weeks later, it comes in with a third company. And that's because maybe your supplier is buying from multiple different forwarders based on the available freight and the costs that they have in terms of the space. So maybe all of a sudden you're working with, 5 different freight forwarders who are bringing your product in. You sign powers of attorney with all of them, so they're all individually doing their one-off customs clearances. But you have such little visibility when that happens. It's possible that one of the forwarders hired doesn't have the right email address. They're emailing somebody who's, left the company a week before. So when you have a different forwarder and you don't know who's carrying your cargo each time, it's very difficult to actually maintain control over your supply chain. You're almost at the whim, sweetie. Sorry. You're almost at the whim of a different forwarder each time, and you don't know when they're going to deliver. You don't know how much it's going to cost potentially. You don't know if they're customs clearing your cargo correctly. And so what can happen, I'm just going to put you on my arm. What can happen is that you have no way to maintain consistency in your supply chain or in your liability. You're basically giving somebody control over your customs compliance, control over costs, for example, on a one-off basis, because maybe they're a bit cheaper, maybe they were selected by the shipper, for example. But that when that happens, you don't have the full visibility and the full, what's the word? You don't know when the cargo is going to deliver at a certain time. I'm sorry, 1 second here.
That's okay.
I'm gonna. Come on, baby.
No worries.
We've all been there.
I have a cat who's homesick today as well, but she's
Mom's
behaving
gonna
right
be
now.
right back.
Hi, sweetie. Can you give
Mr.
mommy like 5-10 minutes and then she'll be done?
Oh, she's long gone.
Yeah.
But while she's doing that, I'll just add it's really important to have a good freight forwarder and to build that relationship.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And we will open this up for questions in just a second because we're getting close to that time. And let's see, somebody did put a question in. Someone put a question in here, I think, or well, you can ask. when she comes back. Let's see. Okay. Elizabeth, you used to coordinate all this stuff as well, right?
I have, yes. That's why a freight forwarder is invaluable.
Yeah. They can make or break you.
Well, they
Okay,
can,
next.
and you need to work with one that has the expertise because that lack of expertise can cost you and hurt you internationally.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. Okay, so we get about the freight forwarders. I was going to ask a real quick question about VAT in Europe, but let me see first if anybody has any questions or comments for Caitlin, because I'd like to involve the audience as well. So if anybody does have any questions, we'll do that. Otherwise, I'll jump in with my last question.
I pop one on the
Yeah,
chat.
Jim.
Yeah. Thank you, Caitlin. He called it a facilitator, another global network. The discussion topic at then was using blockchain for supply chain. Thoughts?
I will say that blockchain isn't the area that I've been focusing on. So I know that the computer system that we use and the computer system, the ERP that a lot of freight forwarders use, they're developing blockchain into their backend. So they actually provide it. And for us, it provides more, I guess, more protection against hacking, for example, and more protection against being overrun through anything that can happen when somebody does break into your ERP, for example, or breaks into your email and opens yourself up to vulnerability. That does bring a good point, though, because I will say that when you are vetting a forwarder, and if you're looking for a forwarder partner versus one-off shipments, you also want to ask them what is their backup strategy if anything does go down. So, for example, I know with my company, they've spent millions of dollars over the past few years, but twice a year, we will do backup failover systems on our servers. You want to find out if your forwarder has any kind of contingency plan if they do get hacked. Because it's not if you get hacked, really, it's when. And it's how quickly will that computer system get it back on running so that your cargo is, protected and they know where the cargo is, for example. If they go down for a week, people, Saya got hacked and we were back down to like pen and paper bills of lading, for example, for a week. And it was a mess, but we all get through it. So that's another thing to ask your forwarder when you vet them.
Mhm. Thanks. So let me ask you real quick about value added tax, VAT, which is a European thing. And what happens, like how can that in Europe and conflict over duties and taxes derail a shipment? Like what happens?
Yeah. So I think it goes back to the sales contract at the very beginning. So if you're the exporter and you're shipping overseas to a country that has VAT, for example, Australia, most of Europe, VAT in
Mhm.
Europe is 20%. I think Australia is 20% as well. And so that's added in addition to duties and taxes. And when you're a non-resident importer, that VAT might get billed back to you in addition to the duties and taxes that you have to cover. And 20% is very high. If you haven't factor that in, but you agreed to pay for the costs end to end from your door to your buyer's door in Europe, then you are looking at a bill that is a large amount of 20% of your commercial invoice value. It's a large amount unexpected that you might not have been ready to pay for. So when you are arranging the sale to your customers, it's often really helpful to have some kind of clause there about liability for, for duties and taxes. What if the duties went up? You agree on the sale, and then 5 months later, you actually sell the product and ship it. And then in those 5 months, maybe another trade war has happened between the US and another country, and they got pissed off at Trump. And then all of a sudden, we're looking at 30% tariffs, whereas before you had 5% tariffs. So those kinds of clauses are really important to have to protect yourself against tariff fluctuation that is happening a lot in the market. So I always, we've heard business case studies when we talk to customers about how they agreed to a fixed cost and said they would absorb all of the duties and tariffs and then didn't expect things to get as volatile as they have over the past year. And then they're stuck holding the bag, and companies have gone bankrupt as a result of that. So at least putting into your sales contract clause that there's some kind of shared liability with your buyer. And that goes into the VAT where, the 20%, if they're unable to be the importer into Europe, where they can essentially pass on the VAT cost to their end consumer potentially. And instead, you as a US exporter agree to pay for it. You want to make sure that you factor that into the cost of the product and the cost of the sale. It's not
huge.
just Sam.
Yeah, very, very problematic. Okay. All right. Does anybody else have like a 30-second question for Caitlin?
I have one.
And if not, oh, Peter.
Hi, Caitlin. By the way, did you graduate from Thunderbird?
I worked at Thunderbird actually
I saw that.
for a year. I was their graduate recruitment marketing.
Yeah,
My
Mm.
first
I
job
saw
back
that.
from Peru, but I'm actually going to ASU for the MBA program right now.
Great, great, Ed.
Awesome.
Congratulations. That's great. One quick question. In the last 3 months, with everything going on with the tariffs, what Trump is doing, have you seen trade both going out and coming in? Has it reduced? Is it the same? Any variances in by industry sector? What have you seen in the last 3 months?
I've seen that people are breathing a little bit easier. So the volatility was intense last year, going from China with the fentanyl tariffs, for example, the 10% up to 125,
Mhm.
and then back down to 20%. So that volatility seems to have smoothed itself out. And so now, and especially because the Supreme Court has come to the aid of importers, right? They've declared the IEEPA tariffs illegal. Now they just declared the Section 122 tariffs illegal, but it was specifically for those people who brought the case in the state of Washington. But it
Mhm.
wasn't open up to all importers. So people are feeling like there's a little bit more predictability. Maybe they refine their sales agreements and purchase agreements with their customers as well.
Mhm.
But in terms of exports, they're doing okay. The reciprocal tariffs that other countries have levied against the US has hurt US business. US ag exporters, for example, that's hurt them for sure when they couldn't sell their soybeans overseas or they had no demand anymore for many of their agricultural products. So, but then when you talk then about tech, we're seeing an uptick in our customers in medical devices, for example. Those have been exporting more. So I think that people are figuring out a way now to react and to adjust on their
Yeah.
what they're paying for their exports into the like buying from the US. People have figured that out better. On the
Mm.
import side, there's a lot of demand. People have more cash in their pocket now because of the IEEPA refunds. And so on the freight side, we're actually seeing a capacity crunch on freight on the Trans-Pacific eastbound coming out of all of Asia into the US. Maybe it's because people need to restock in their product. Maybe now they have a little bit more cash or cash coming so that they can invest in more capital goods and inventory right now. So there is actually a bit of a point now where there's so little capacity on the ocean freight market coming out of Asia because there's been so little demand for the past year. But now people are starting to want to book again because they have a little bit more money to do it or they absolutely have to replenish. So now we're seeing peak season here in the middle of the summer.
Hmm.
So
I
it's
appreciate that.
peak season.
Well, I can just say I have a small EMC for wines and spirits, and I can, since this all started, I will tell you that, of course, the tariffs have put on goods coming in, but in exports, countries that we normally did business with, distributors, they're like, you know what? We don't need to buy your products. We can source elsewhere. And that's basically what's happened. I mean, even in Canada, which was our largest export market for wines and spirits, they removed every bottle off the shelf. So it's been hard. Yeah. So
Yeah, it opens
anyway,
up the market. It opens up all these buyers who used to be buyers of US products. Now they're starting to look to source from other countries besides the
exactly.
Hmm.
Whereas before we maybe had the command on that market on that product. It is really hurtful. It has hurt the US exports for sure.
Very counterproductive.
Well, and that's going to be
Okay, so
difficult to
yeah.
get back into the future, as we saw with the soybeans. They have never achieved that.
I think what they're buying from Brazil or Argentina now.
Yeah.
Brazil came online with the first time that they embargoed. So and now China can leverage between the US and Brazil. So it works for them.
Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely.
We are almost at the top of the hour, so we're going to wrap up. Caitlin, thank you so much. You are a miracle mother. You managed to juggle all of this with 2 kids at home in different rooms. That's amazing. So thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us. And for everybody who's on today, if you enjoyed today's discussion, I hope you'll join us again next month. It's always the fourth Thursday of the month, which is not always the last Thursday of the month. But next month it is June 25th. And in the meantime, make sure you check out the calendar for the Global Chamber. There's always an event going on. You can't sleep at 2 in the morning here in the US. Something's happening in Europe already. So make sure you keep in touch with everybody. And thank you so much. And we will see y'all next month. Next month.
Thank you, Anita. Thank you, everybody. Great
Thank you.
questions.
Thank you, Caitlin.
Thanks for your patience too.
Thanks. Take care.